Good afternoon, everyone. A pleasure to be here at this inaugural I Love Travel event. I'd like firstly to thank Bernd and the team for inviting me to be here with you today. It's an absolute pleasure. What I want to do is talk to you really about some of the shifts that we're beginning to observe in the travel market through the eyes of the consumer. What's going on with the consumer out there? How are they behaving differently? What changes are we seeing in the way that they're responding to new offers, but also to existing offers, to maybe things that they've done year after year after year? Because of course, travel is such an important imperative for us as people. You know, human beings are peripatetic by nature. We love the idea of moving. Well, at least some of us do. Of course, one of the interesting things that we learn about human beings at school is an understanding that not all of us travel very much. In fact, it is only reckoned that about 30% of us as humans choose to move away from where we are born. That the majority of us actually find ourselves throughout our lives living within about 25 kilometers of where we were born. That we choose often to stay very, very close. But that doesn't necessarily stop us from wanting to see the world through a different perspective, a different pair of eyes at certain points in our life. And maybe that we're lucky enough to do that every year, or maybe 2 or 3 times a year. But that desire to explore, to have an adventure, to go out and see the world and see something new, to come across new cultures, new opportunities, new ways of looking at life is massively important. And that's, I think, that's a natural part of a human state. That's something that doesn't really change. That's something that we see continue. But for me, what's really interesting is how we adapt to that as human beings, as we continue to evolve. And as we begin to see more trend-related issues start to impact on maybe younger consumers, but also consumers from different backgrounds, as changing economies enable them often to travel more, as technologies enable them to travel more, and of course as political changes often encourage us to go to parts of the world that maybe we would never previously have been able to go. Now, recently we spoke to Tom Marchant, who is one of a new breed of travel agents who has a business now called Black Tomato, which looks at this continued growth of a newer class of consumer, of holidaymaker, who's always looking for the different, looking for something that isn't run of the mill. And when we spoke to Tom, he identified very cleverly one of the key shifts that we believe we're seeing right now in the market. That whilst we continue to see a primary reason why we go on holiday is this idea to maybe disconnect, to turn off, to have a couple of weeks where we don't have to deal with the normal stresses and strains of everyday life, that we can disconnect and recalibrate both mentally and physically, that we take time out, not just to have a breather, but maybe also to reassess what we want to get out of life. That we're beginning to see some quite interesting shifts in also how we think about travel, how we think about holiday, and how we think about that really important thing that is time that we spend away. Now, as I'm sure we're all aware, we seem to live in a world, this 21st century world that we all now find ourselves in, that seems to be increasingly frenetic. That often it's about pace, it's about the speed of change, the rate of change, that every day it seems we come across a new social platform or a new way of communicating, a new way of keeping in touch with people, new technologies that enable us to be more connected, not now just with people, but also with other technologies or with other machines. So the growth, of course, for example, in the home of the Internet of Things, of these devices like Google Home or Alexa that are there to help and enable and to talk back to us and to provide us with information and services. All of these increasingly lead, I think, for many of us to this environment where we're feeling more time pressured and that the world just keeps changing at a faster and faster rate. And this freneticism that we see in the 21st century, I think, is leading towards a new type of demand amongst consumers for new types of travel services. That increasingly, I think about this idea that holidays more and more despite the pressure that we have at home, are actually not about switching off. That increasingly, they're about switching on. That it's about finding ways to connect, to reconnect, to engage, to learn, to feel that you are part of something, that you are joining up the dots. And this very simple shift for us is absolutely critical to understand so much of what we see going on out here as part of this festival. This idea that actually I'm no longer going on holiday to just fly and flop, to lie on a beach for 2 weeks and do nothing, apart from maybe drink myself stupid and if I'm lucky get the occasional shag. Maybe I'm actually thinking about something more from a holiday. That actually I do want to spend time learning about a culture, learning about new food, maybe a new language, a new religion, a new way of doing things. And this sense of an increasingly demanding customer, an increasingly demanding traveler who is looking for life-changing improvement. Then maybe they're rethinking where and how they spend their time and their money because it's so valuable to them. That these 2 weeks, these 3 weeks, these occasional weekends that they get to spend away are some of the most important time that they have. This idea that often we work to live, or do we live to work? And increasingly more of us are working to live. We're working in order to have those special moments outside of our day-to-day routines that actually define who we are and say something about who we are as a person. And increasingly we're seeing how businesses, how hotels, how tour operators, how travel businesses are having to adapt more and more quickly to the traveler's desire, I think, for more fulfilling and ultimately more world-changing experiences. And we heard Patrick and Ian talk earlier about this really important issue of this idea of experience. And that's very much what I want to touch on in this talk. So that's the travel agency I was talking about, Black Tomato, with a recent campaign. So whilst they talk at the start about this idea of disconnecting, what they're actually telling us, what they're actually trying to communicate to us and to sell us is this idea of, through us, you're actually going to learn more about yourself. We're going to help you push yourself to limits. We're going to help you come away from this holiday having felt that you're actually going to learn more about yourself. You're going to discover more about who you are as an individual, about what your personal goals are, your ambitions, about who you truly are. This notion of the process of self-actualization, which of course Maslow discusses when he thinks about this process of self-actualization that we go through as consumers, as we tend to engage less with product, with buying stuff, and more with what experience can deliver and what we learn from that experience. And this process of learning from experience, I think, comes to one of the key crux points that I want to make. So this understanding that as we maybe turn the dial in a different way, that we no longer see travel as a moment to turn off, but in fact see it as an engagement to turn on, we're doing a couple of other really, really important points, which ties in with a new way, I think, that we're beginning to see the travel industry in particular start to grow. Now, we've heard the word experience already, and the use of this word experience, I think, is really, really critical because it's a key talking point across different industry sectors, including, obviously, retail and product, which is, if I'm trying to actually, as a brand, rethink what it means to sell product, and I'm trying to actually engage with product, how do I monetize selling nothing but selling an experience, which of course is what the travel industry does really, really well. And what we come to here is the idea of now what's being called the transformation economy, which is that I'm not really interested just in selling you an experience, because an experience often is a very passive thing. I allow it to happen to me. Go on, give me an experience. Take me away. Let something happen to me. Instead, what we're saying is that increasingly our consumer, our guest, the person who's engaging with the travel experience, is actually looking for goods, products, and services that are going to make them healthier, wealthier, and happier. So suddenly we start to see this more proactive sense of engagement, that I'm not simply going on holiday and expecting all sorts of different things to happen to me. I am proactively involved in a decision-making process, including while I'm on holiday, that isn't about switching off, but turning on to how do I make myself more productive? How do I become more mindful? How do I become more aware of my good points and my bad points? How do I become more in control of my life? At a time when so many of us see a world that seems to be spinning out of control, it's a very simple question that many of us are asking ourselves on a daily basis. How do I take back control? How do I feel that I am in control in this crazy world in which I seem to find myself? So this sense of this new definition of the ultimate travel experience, which is about being happier, healthier, and wealthier, for me is very interesting, especially as, well, certainly when I come back from holidays, I certainly find my wallet a good deal lighter than when I went. And yet that idea that I'm trying to find ways of actually engaging with a process that is going to enrich me. Because it's also about taking the long-term approach and the long-term philosophy. It's not about thinking that this trip is just 2 weeks of my life, 2 weeks in the summer, 2 weeks in the sun, and then it's over and maybe I have some nice memories. It's this more careful, considerate journey that we see so many travelers and consumers wanting to take. And going back to what Patrick was saying, it's very much part of this growth towards the experience collector, that rather than just buying more stuff, whether that be fine wine or a car or just another piece of furniture for your house, you're actually investing your hard-earned cash in a trip, in a travel experience that is going to be meaningful for you, for your partner, and for your family. So often it's about a desire to try something different, to try something new, hence the continued growth of looking for new destinations, new cities, new resorts, new countries that we really feel maybe many of us aren't yet exploring, or that offer something new and that offer us something different. The desire to be surprised, to find something unique. So instead of collecting tangible assets, this desire to seek and to collect intangible, rare experiences. I'm very interested, walking around here today, at the sheer number of guides and experience agents out there who are very keen to often show you a very unique and very niche view of a particular country or even a particular city. The idea that I can explore Germany through its lakes, that I can suddenly see the city through a totally different type of hotel experience, that I can in fact be guided through a city on a sustainability tour, that I start to see very niche and very unique opportunities to see the layers of a city be pulled back and to be revealed in some very particular ways. And that sense of this journey into the deep is something that I think we're seeing more and more of. This idea that I'm finding ways to have a more profound engagement with this country, with this city, or even with this hotel, or of course, as we see here, with the idea of the Titanic tour being offered by Blue Marble, that I myself will be able to go on a diving tour to actually go and see and visit the wreck of the Titanic. And so that sense of the unique and the marvelous and the special, I think, is very important. Next, of course, is the continued growth of a very important consumer market, which is the older consumer, the mature traveler, that increasingly we see people moving through their 50s and their 60s and their 70s and into their 80s and their 90s who are still enjoying relative good health and prosperity, and in fact have the opportunity and the availability to continue to travel. And rather than their sense of their world and their sphere of experience begin to shrink, which is what we traditionally expect to see with a more mature consumer, that in fact it's doing the reverse. It's opening up, that they have the opportunity, the desire, and the wherewithal to keep traveling, to experience the rare and the undiscovered. And they're certainly not letting their age get in the way of their interests, their passions, and their ambitions. Which is why, of course, we now have a whole raft of magazines and media devoted specifically to the third age, the boomer, the eco-boomer, the flat-ager, the ageless consumer, this group that continues to grow, where really they are defying the sense of age. You know, we now live in a period, in an era of history, where we will see increasing numbers of us here in this room become centenarians, that we will reach the age of 100 and beyond, and will live happy and healthy lives throughout our 90s and beyond. And that sense that this generation are wanting to have memorable experiences of fun and romance, but with safety, security, and luxury, the things that make them feel comfortable, I think becomes very, very interesting and changes the way that we often think about dynamic travel, which we tend still to assume is very much what we're going to get up to between the ages of, say, 18 to 25. That is the moment in our life in which we have an adventure, in which we go traveling, in which we find ourselves, in which we explore the world, in our opportunity to do something different. And increasingly, of course, this is also happening with a 50s and a 60s and a 70s plus consumer, hugely important. To the extent, of course, that we now see countries and we see regions start to target these consumers very specifically. So the next video I'm going to share with you is a campaign that's just been launched by Argentina, by the Tourist Board of Argentina, to look specifically at some of the qualities that they have in Argentina. Mendoza country, which of course is known for wine, but also for many other characteristics, thinking about this particular generation, this demographic of travelers very specifically, and how they can talk to them and appeal to them.
¿Puedo decir una cosa?
¿Qué?
La p*** vale la pena estar vivo.
Okay, I think a really great piece of communication there from that particular tourist board. And of course, what it's helping us to identify is that we are living through some continued shifts that I think are very important for us to remember, especially when we think about older demographics of consumers, which our natural tendency is to assume that as we grow old, we will continue to expect people to become more close-minded, that we expect people to become more old-fashioned, and we expect them to behave in a certain certain way, with a certain sense of maturity. And of course they don't. And I think as we start to see this shift through consumers born after 1945 and into the late 40s and the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, and as those groups of consumers age, of course, we see all of those consumers being affected by the changes that they have lived through, the way that we have actually broken down the rules and the regulations and the institutions that created often a very, very organized and very hierarchical society. And of course, many of us under the age of 50 understand what that feels like, but we cannot ignore the fact that consumers in their 60s and their 70s have been part of that process of change. So we expect to see that continue, and that will have radical impacts on the way that we sell, the way that we communicate, and the type of experiences our future guests are going to want to have. Let's look now just at the other end of the scale and what's going on with our younger consumers. Now, millennials, of course, as we know, and by millennials, let's be really clear, millennials are now in their mid-20s through to their mid-30s, so they're no longer young. They're now moving towards not middle age, but certainly what you could call their first sort of trimester of age. And they're at a very interesting point, because this generation that have been so much about travel and so much about adventure and this idea for exploration are, of course, now maybe finding that they have a long-term partner, that they're starting a family, and so their desire for travel isn't going away, but they're just having to think about it in a very different way, because they've now got extra people to bring with them on the trip. They've got a partner, and maybe they've got a small child. But increasingly, they are still this restless, borderless cultural grazer, for whom a key part of their growing up has been their ability to get out there, to see the world, to experience newness and new culture. This is, of course, the Airbnb, Uber generation. These are the kids that created those brands and those organizations, and that are still ceaselessly looking at ways to discover newness and what's next. And so for them to continue to use mobile and to use online technology to explore the possibilities of where they go next is hugely important. And when we move down a generation to what's often called Generation Z, we increasingly see this desire to travel continue. So research conducted in the US by Expedia shows that, we've got a generation here that are traveling up to a month a year. Now, you only have to go back less than 10 years to see a figure that was pretty much half that for that generation, because they had neither the flexibility nor the finances to be able to do that. And as travel continues to get cheaper, and as the cost of living continues in most countries to also fall down, and as most of us have more disposable income, that does continue to rise, the opportunities to travel continue to grow. In fact, they spend a quarter of their budgets on flights, and that's the most of any age group. So again, if we look forward into the future, we see a new demographic emerging, our late teens and early 20-something consumer, for whom travel is an absolutely vital constituent part of who they are, of who they think they are. And this is why for us, this is no longer simply about the once-a-year holiday, the switch-off moment, the go away with mates and just have a great time and forget about everything else. This is about this continued desire for switching on, for life learning, for engagement, for finding out more, for discovering new things.
This is where all is never seen and rarely done. Here, you can steer yourself in any direction you choose. No maps, no guidebooks. Through HDBs, jalans, and lorongs. Shh. With passion, you wait in silence. And discover the possibilities of learning new languages, of chirps and tweets, curves and lines, solids and voids. Here, you walk atop trees or around them. This is where your passion for wandering the familiar and exploring the unknown is made possible.
Singapore, who would have believed it, once known as the world's most boring city on the planet? And now, of course, we suddenly look at it through totally different eyes because of the communication, because of the way they're now pitching themselves, the way they're positioning themselves as a brand, as a destination, as a place, a departure point for exploration. And I think that's the key thing. Okay, let's start to unpack some of this a little bit and think about the drivers. Why is this happening? Well, as I said, for me, this core word that moves us beyond experience is this idea of transformation. This idea that it isn't simply enough to have an experience. I'm actually looking to make myself a better person. I want to engage with goods, products, and services that are going to make me healthier, wealthier, and happier. I'm investing in new ways of thinking about how I invest the little money I have. I'm thinking about how I learn throughout my life. I'm paying more attention to my health, and I'm thinking about what it means to stay healthy. I'm paying more attention to what I eat. I'm certainly paying more attention to the planet and how I use resources from a sustainable perspective, both at home. And I'm also asking that question of the people that I buy products from, whether it's when I go to a shop and I decide to return the packaging, or I deliberately decide not to do something because I don't like the policy of that brand. Or I'm actually asking the travel agent about the holiday and the experience and maybe even the hotel I'm going to stay in terms of their ecological criteria or the factors that they may have that show to me that they're making an effort when it comes to sustainability. And so this sense of how as consumers we're becoming more demanding, we're becoming more inquiring, again is something that we have to understand and we have to embrace. We have to understand that this upsurge towards transformative travel experiences that enable people to believe or to feel that they're having a positive impact on themselves, on their lives through taking this trip, I think is the first and most important thing. That by going on this trip, I actually feel I'm going to come out a better person, that I'm improving myself. Now, clearly, we still have a huge number of us that on a regular basis choose to just go on a holiday and to switch off, to fly and flop. But all of the statistics that we've been looking at begin to show us that things are moving in the other direction, that this dial, as I keep saying, is being turned the other way, that we're seeking a different type of travel experience. 83% of travel advisors say consumers will pay a premium for what they describe as wellness travel and or access to healthy products and services while traveling. That even on holiday, which is supposed to be about indulgence and not thinking about the diet or how we keep fit, that actually that's exactly what we want to do when we go on holiday. We suddenly want to pay attention to our bodies. We want to pay attention to our minds. We want to think holistically about who we are as an individual rather than thinking, yay, let's just get bladdered for 15 nights, one night after the other. And this shift, I think, towards a very different type of mentality when traveling is, of course, critical here. This sense that we start to invest in a very different way. And again, the statistics are beginning to prove out this idea that the wellness traveler, the holistic traveler, is more keen to invest when they travel abroad and outspends the average international tourist by up to 61%. Now, this desire, I think, for the unique, the special, and the adventure is also a critical part of how our consumer is starting to travel and what it is that they want from their travel experiences. And I think in a world in which distraction often comes in the forms of apps and mobiles and all the technology that we now have that's literally pulling our attention and sucking our attention, often I think our attention becomes an economy in itself, the attention economy. And it's a resource that we often feel is a dwindling resource. So increasingly, we see the ways in which hotels can actually be the antidote to that and can offer an experience which enables us to actually focus on the important things in life, to spend time with friends and family, communicating, talking, engaging, socializing, eating together, or sometimes doing that completely on your own, as you will discover if you go to see Eremito in Italy, the convent monastery turned hotel, which offers a very secluded or kind of one-on-one experience where often you'll be encouraged to dine alone and to have a unique experience that is about time to yourself, time to reflect, time to think, time to appreciate. But what we also begin to discover is that for many of us in a fast-paced world full of noise and distractions, silence, of course, is something that we're prepared to pay for. The opportunity to actually not be surrounded by noise, to actually be able to turn off the mobile. Maybe not even have a mobile signal at all, so we can't even blame our phones or ourselves. There's just no signal. Silence is now offered as a luxury item, according to Matthew Crawford, who's the author of The World Beyond Your Head. Because we have allowed our attention to become monetized, if you want yours back, you're going to have to pay for it. And of course, hotels that offer silence, hotels that offer serenity and sanctuary are by no means new. But increasingly for us, they're going to be a very viable part of what they do. The opportunity to allow us to just separate ourselves from the day-to-day to focus on what's really important. Now, as a result of that, we've certainly seen the uptick in what you could call extreme escapism. The idea of the trip that really allows you to take yourself out of yourself and out of the norms of your everyday life and to position yourself or put yourself somewhere often quite strange or quite surreal. Again, as Patrick mentioned, Disney are about to open their Star Wars themed hotel in which you can absolutely immerse yourself in the world of Star Wars and the experiences that can offer based on the film and the series of films. The idea that you might even choose while you're on holiday to visit the Jian Li Ju Theatre, which again creates this experiential environment in which you become an actor. And it's not enough anymore to go to these kind of experiential theatre installations where you sort of wander around and things happen to you. Now, of course, you've actually got a script to learn. You have a part to play. You have a role. You have a costume to wear. And you absolutely become a dynamic part of the world, the fantasy world that is being created around you. And of course, whether that be through a real-world engagement or, as we begin to discover more and more, through VR and AR, through virtual reality or augmented reality, this desire to escape and to plant ourselves in a totally new and fantastical world is, of course, increasingly important. But the desire to run away doesn't necessarily mean that some of us don't want to confront the reality of the world out there. And so the growth of what's been called civic tourism is also hugely important. That when I go on holiday, I don't expect to see a world that is perfect. That I travel, I visit a town, a city, I visit a rural area, and actually I want to be immersed in the culture of that town and city, including the political interruptions, including the discourse, and including the strife. And that's why, in fact, why I'm traveling. I am traveling to really understand what makes this society and what is affecting this society. And I want to engage with the people, with the businesses, and with the opportunities that tell me what is going on. Customers are drawn to brands that communicate a sense of purpose beyond just existing to sell something. So if you, as a property, for example, if you as a hotel brand, or you particularly as a travel agent, can actually get the message across that you have a purpose, you have a philosophy, you have an ethos, you have ethical standards, those are more likely to attract a consumer than actually frighten them or scare them away. So if we start to talk about this in the context of trends, this idea of change that we're seeing within the industry and within the consumer, we can start to get a sense of maybe some of the short-term and the long-term differences that we can expect to encounter both here in Europe but also globally. And for us, I think innovation, of course, is always critically important. Newness in terms of how things are beginning to change. And I think that sense of a desire to move away from often the traditional tropes of travel is something that we're seeing. And this list that I'm going to talk us through, I think, starts to help us to define what this sense of change is looking like. And for the first for us is a redefinition of this idea of wellness. Now, by no means is wellness a new term. It's been around for a good decade. And it's grown out of this idea, of course, what are the other additional activities that we can provide within a hotel, whether it's a resort property or a city property. What else can we do to monetize the guest experience? And one of the areas that, of course, we latched onto a good 15, 20 years ago was the notion of spa and the notion of fitness. So, of course, when I'm traveling, I want to keep fit. I want to have a moment maybe to detox, a massage, relaxation. So the growth of pools, spas, saunas, baths, Turkish baths, all of these kind of opportunities. Developing at the same time, of course, that we also had the growth of the business center. So it was wellness and business were the two of the key areas, in addition to F&B, that hotels wanted to promise. Now, wellness has done very well for the hotel sector and has been often a key draw. And has also been very, very good in terms of delivering extra revenue to properties. What we begin to see now, though, is how many consumers are wanting something more than the traditional offer that comes through a spa, which obviously is often very, very body-related, and it's about massage, it's about this very simplistic idea of wellness, because it's really just focused on an external skin-based idea that basically I can offer you a tactile experience, and that's going to relax you, and that's job done. Where this is moving, of course, is this idea of a more holistic approach, hence the growth in recent years of hotels now beginning to offer yoga classes or Pilates. So again, the opportunity to focus more on mindfulness. And that, of course, now is moving on as we begin to discover that mindfulness isn't just a sort of a basic idea of trying to meditate or trying to be calm while I'm on holiday, which I don't normally do. And maybe I'll sit in a room and there's a nice bit of fragrance and somebody's lit a few incense sticks, or maybe they've turned the lights down and there's a bit of plinky plonky music on in the background, and suddenly I'm supposed to feel really zen and calm and everything's going to be great and, job done. Increasingly, we're actually thinking about, well, how do I tackle the root causes of the issues that I face as a human being that's tired, that's stressed, that's fatigued, has too much to deal with, has daily problems. And we're beginning to actually think through these processes, I think, in a far more constructive way, rather than just thinking I can massage this out of another human being. Hence the growth, I think, of what Corinthia Hotel have developed, which is by working with a neuroscientist, they actually looked at how they could develop specific programs for guests that was, how do we ensure that you get a good night's sleep? What can we do by looking at you, talking to you, and understanding the issues that you face? What can we do to ensure that you sleep really well when you're with us? Because as we all know, a good night's sleep is probably the most important thing that we want as human beings, but also we expect from a hotel experience. So can I get you to have a good night's sleep? And I can do that through actually looking at your mental health, by understanding your concentration levels and your diet, what you're eating. And by working with your diet and working with your concentration and applying all sorts of different criteria, I can actually have a far more holistic understanding of what you require as a human being. And this approach towards wellness for us is where we see really interesting gains and really, really great opportunities. This more open-minded approach to thinking not just about the idea of what I do to somebody's skin, but actually what I do to the internals of their body, but also what I do to here. The way that I help them to re-engage their brain and start to use their brain, often in different ways. We're also seeing, I think, a rethink and a reboot around the notion of luxury. Luxury as a word is, of course, hugely overused, especially within the hospitality sector, and often promises enormous amounts but delivers very little when it comes to the consumer or the guest experience. Most of us now, of course, know that real luxury is not gold taps in a bathroom. It might not even be a pillow menu. Luxury for many of us is the opportunity to have peace, quiet, seclusion, a beautiful view, a great night's sleep, fabulous sex, all sorts of things. But it often relates more to very human issues rather than necessarily the peripherals that we'll find in a room. And increasingly, this is why brands like Muji, the Japanese no-nonsense essentials products brands, are thinking about, well, what does it mean if Muji do hotels? What would a Muji hotel look like? What would the Muji hotel experience be? How do we deliver this notion of stripped-back luxury where we remove everything to its essence, which of course is a very Japanese kind of philosophy anyway, but that sense of the anti-gorgeous or the anti-cheap hotel, I think is very interesting, and how increasingly we start to maybe strip away the excess. Luxury hotels, of course, are about 15 times more wasteful and excessive in their provision of services and their use of energy and resources than a standard hotel. And so that understanding that maybe that's not what the consumer is after. They do not need a mountain of clean towels. And they certainly don't want the gold taps. So as travel becomes really a more everyday part of our lives, it no longer becomes this special thing that we do every now and then, and it becomes something that we have, that it evolves from the extraordinary into the ordinary. We have to rethink the offer. we have to rethink what it means for somebody who comes into a room, if we're a hotelier, and is suddenly bombarded by all this excess within their room, with all of this wastefulness. But just by being there, I'm suddenly engaged in this process of resource excess. And I think asking that question, more than just simply the little note that gets put on the bed or by the side of the sink that says we're doing our best to save energy and save washing powder and please hang up your towel. How many hotels have you been into where there actually is nowhere to hang your towel? And even if you do try and hang your towel, it still gets changed. You know, that sense that some of these issues are where we need the reboot and the rethink. Now, as I've said, for many of us, a critical part of travel is, of course, the ability to sleep well. And for us, there's definitely a new focus going on with the notion of the importance of sleep. We've spent a while, I think, focusing on the other stuff that we do during our waking hours, but really going back to basics and focusing on sleep and a good night's sleep is hugely important. We've been very interested in the launch of a new sleeper train in the UK, traveling from London to Scotland, looking at this idea of encouraging and aiding a really great night's sleep. And in fact, the mattress manufacturer Simba has created a high-tech airline seat that monitors passengers' comfort levels and then responds accordingly to body type and also to movement within the seat. So it starts to actually interrogate you as you sit in the seat to better understand how they can help you ensure that you get the most out of your flight and your sleep experience. Now, as our cities become busier and workers often face longer commutes, we're beginning to see how hospitality spaces are also rethinking how they provide the services that they have to new types of consumers and new consumer demographics. So we've become very intrigued in hotels that are breaking the rules, as it were, by starting to think about what it might mean to charge by the hour, which of course previously has had a pretty bad rap. You didn't want to be a hotel that charged by the hour. It kind of meant you were normally a hotel of a certain type. Increasingly now, of course, we're beginning to reassess what it means to engage with a hotel and to think about, well, actually, yeah, I would really love a hotel around the corner from me that I could regularly use just to go and have some downtime. Imagining having a hotel around the corner from your office that you could regularly use for an afternoon nap. How amazing would that be? Most of us don't have the luxury of an office with a door and a couch. But if I could actually find somewhere around the corner from my office where I could just nip out for half an hour's sleep in the afternoon, just imagine how much more productive your day would be. So that sense of the growth of the sleep hotel, the recharge hotel, hotels challenging that traditional idea that the only way to make money from a guest is through a 24-hour cycle, and a cycle of experience is something we've already begun to notice. This is the Sleep Hotel in Hong Kong. Again, this is by no means a new idea. What we're seeing is new ways of thinking about how this is communicated and marketed to a potential demographic and to a potential audience. Now, I've already used the word sanctuary, this idea of the time to get away and the moment to get away. As we become increasingly secular as societies, and as our trust and our engagement with traditional religions starts or continues to actually devolve and become more and more unstructured and more prismatic and more fractured, we begin to, I think, understand the continued desire that many of us have to actually find ourselves or to find meaning within our lives. And so that sense of actually what travel does and what travel can offer as part of that is something we've seen a lot of. The growth and the continued growth of the festival movement, whether that be from Restival to Burning Man, where spiritual inquiry sits at the heart of that experience. This is the opportunity in which you can find yourself, you can learn more about yourself, I think becomes very important. And without a doubt, and a unique part of travel and the travel experience has always been this idea of the magical and the supernatural. When do I begin to discover something special about myself and about parts of the world? When do I really see the night sky? When do I see a view uninterrupted by man, where I get the chance to commune with nature? And this sense, I think, of hotels, travel agencies, offers that revolve around this idea of this holistic experience that really targets physical, mental, spiritual, and emotional well-being for us is where we see particular growth. And Restival, I think, for us is a perfect example, pitching itself as a reward for surviving modern life that allows you to build the toolkit to thrive. Again, it's not just about this idea that I'm going to disconnect. It's very much this idea that this is about a process of learning and is enabling me to switch on, to reconnect, to re-engage, to find energy and to do things differently. Now, moving on from that, I think, is also this idea of how increasingly the hotel environment itself is becoming politicized. This, I think, a very good example. This is the walled-off hotel that you'll find in the Lebanon, in Palestine, located right by the wall that separates Israeli and Palestine territories. In the Middle East, aims to promote a greater awareness of its political significance. So again, there is no rest in this hotel from understanding the situation that you find yourself in. You are constantly reminded about what's going on, about what's happening right outside your window. And that sense, I think, about again, engaging with locale, engaging with the stories that make an area special is something that's going on here. And I think that sense of the politics of travel, for us, again, become increasingly important with tomorrow's consumer. And then finally, I think for us, just one country that for us is certainly on the map when it comes to thinking about new destinations, and that is clearly a country that's going through change and is wanting to communicate and broadcast that change to us very strongly, is Saudi Arabia. And driven by the need to diversify its economy and to relax its ultra-conservative image, the fifth largest country in Asia, I think many of us forget just how large it is starting to open up to tourism. So by 2020, the country aims to attract 1.5 million tourists, which of course, as we know, compared to most other countries, is a drop in the ocean in terms of size. That shows you just how small their current tourism market is. And that sense of how they're beginning to embrace and encourage us to think about them as a tourist destination, we think is very interesting. So the Red Sea Project, a high-end resort comprising 50 islands spread across an area the size of Belgium, and Neom, which is the megacity that they're building, which is going to connect Egypt and Jordan, which is going to be entirely run on clean and recyclable energy. So this is an area often where we also see great advances being made, not just in terms of cultural improvement, political improvement, issues that relate to society and to often equality, but also where we're thinking about technological advancement, where we see entire cities go off the grid in terms of their use of energy and their use of resources. So to finish off, I'd just like to give you, as it were, a toolkit, some of the points that I've discussed in this presentation. And the first would be really, to get to grips with how our hospitality market continues to evolve and to change, and therefore how we need to adapt if we want to both survive and thrive. That consumers, particularly our millennial demographic, are prioritizing the experiential element of travel over those focused on high-end products. So really, if we're thinking about what it is that makes us attractive, what we think about our offer, it's not necessarily going to be about the product as we often describe it, or this notion of high-end service. Increasingly, it's about the experiences that we can deliver. And that often starts, if we're a website or if we're a service provider, if we're an agent, about thinking about the community and the conversation, the relationship building that's required, because this generation thrives on this sense of community and conversation. So it's no longer enough simply to hide behind a screen, or to imagine really that this is about a functional booking process. Increasingly, this consumer wants a conversation. They want to understand more, they want to learn more, and they want to feel that they can talk to somebody who's going to guide them through what is often a very important decision that they're going through. For me, one of the big shifts that we need to make is redefining wellness. So wellness does not equal spa. Wellness does not equal somebody sticking their thumbs into your back with a smelly candle and some plinky-plonky music. That is not wellness. Wellness is about rethinking how we look at somebody and from a holistic perspective, help them to understand mind, body, spirit, heart, everything, the whole thing. How we help them to rethink what is important to them in life, and how we offer positive solutions to ensure that not only is their stay a fantastic one, because we've made some incremental changes to enable them on this journey of self-improvement, but they can also actually know that those changes will continue once they leave and once they go back home. And that, I think, is what our traveler is continually looking for. Consumers are more in tune with their well-being and require services beyond the gym. So we've got to think, I think, often in a slightly cleverer way about what it means to offer service within the property, within a hotel. Sleep. It's a no-brainer. It's what we provide. If you're a hotelier, you provide a bed. It still remains the core offer. But really beginning to understand, actually, how important that part of the 24-hour cycle is hugely important. And just really focusing on great sleep, I think, for us is a very important part of what this should be about. And the opportunities and inspiration that can fall out of great sleep. Because as I've said, that could be about thinking about how I offer a great nap. 20 minutes, half an hour of great sleep time, of great downtime, not necessarily 8 hours. Travelers now expect to be able to get what they want when they want. We're a convenience generation. Everything is at the touch of a button. You know, pretty much everything we want is a few clicks away. And that's changed the way that we expect service as people. It's changed the way that we expect to be able to relate and to engage with a hotel or a travel experience when we go on holiday. So increasingly, if you're involved in the travel industry, your job is to demonstrate your versatility and to reshape your offer to fit their schedules. We have to be increasingly consumer-centric in what we do. It's no longer enough to simply say, well, this is our offer, take it or leave it. Increasingly, every offer that we have is going to have to be tailored for each individual consumer. And we can't necessarily always put an increased price tag on that moving forward. We're going to have to find ways to be increasingly tailored in our approach, in what we do. Because again, for us, the signs are that our 21st century consumer is increasingly demanding and more specific in terms of what they want. And if they don't get what they like, they go somewhere else. Activism. Now, we would say that it's in danger of being associated with privilege. So we have to actually find ways to make it inclusive and easy. We have to find ways to actually motivate our guests to feel that they are able to do good, to make more sustainable options when they stay in a hotel, to understand they're part of a process for change. In terms of resource management, in terms of energy use. The more accessible it is to challenge the system, the more people of all backgrounds will participate. So our job, it is incumbent on us to find ways to make things easier for our guests and to make them feel that this isn't hard work. Making the right choice is not a difficult choice. Making the right choice is the easy choice. It's the choice to make. And then finally, previously not an option for travelers, but increasingly we will see more and more people, I think, start to visit different parts of the world, Saudi Arabia being a perfect example where the relaxation of visa laws really changes the idea of the identity of a country. Because as we know, as soon as people start traveling to a country and they learn about the people, they engage with the people, they try the food, they become part of the society, they socialize, they interact, they talk. Our views on what often we viewed as an alien culture, as a group of people that we don't understand, with social mores and with lifestyles that we don't understand, that all breaks down because that, of course, is the wonder of travel. That's why we do it. Because we come back different. We come back different people. We come back having learnt about the world around us, and we come back having learnt something, most importantly, of course, about ourselves. And that never changes. But increasingly, I think more and more of us want that integral element of the holiday experience. I want to come back feeling that I've learnt more about myself, I've learnt more about where I've gone, and I'm a better person for it. Thank you.
Wow. Thanks so much, Chris. Chris Sanderson from the Future Laboratory. Wow, that was amazing. That I feel like listening to that talk was like being on a rocket ship, kind of going up into space, and now I'm kind of orbiting the Earth, and I've got this amazing perspective. So thank you so much for kind of unpacking all of those trends that you talked about. You know, I mean, I'd love to know where your crystal ball is, your process of coming up with all of that. I mean, it's just incredible. Does anyone have any questions for Chris? I'm sure we've got some questions down here. But I just wanted to, while I get the microphone here, I want to ask you, you talked about freneticism and this concept of like switching on and off. Or off. But my question is, we talk about travelers and, you're a leisure traveler or a business traveler or whatever. do you think that, you could be one or other, on or off, and that the same person could be, they might have a weekend in New York where they're on and they're, going to a big festival and they're doing things, and then they might have a few weeks later on in the year where they're off and they're going to Thailand, for a wellness retreat. Do you think that there's this sort of bipolar thing? Being
no,
on
absolutely,
and off,
Ian. And I think, to be honest, it's less binary. I think that's one of the big shifts, isn't it? Which is that increasingly it isn't necessarily just about being an on or an off. About 10 years ago, we came up with the expression bleisure. And defined the idea of the bleisure. You hate bleisure.
That's a terrible word.
We love the word bleisure. Look how many hits it gets now. But the bleisure traveller, the idea was this business and leisure traveller, which is that often they converge, which is that a trip is no longer just for business or just for leisure and pleasure. Often we put the two together and we find ways to re-engage, to have a spot of culture, a spot of downtime when we're also on a business trip. So I think increasingly, whilst for me, the big binary shift is towards this on mentality. Of course, we all find ways to interact with the travel experience differently, and we'll have moments when all we want to do is just hit that off dial, and all we want to do is just lie on that sun lounger and just think about nothing. But the shift, this notion of the trend, the general trend for us is that more and more people are looking for travel experiences that are about being engaged, that are about learning, about finding out more about culture and finding out more about themselves. And so that's just the big overall drift.
So we had a question here.
Yep.
Okay. That's all right. What's your name? Leah.
Yep. Hi there.
Hi, Leah.
We're talking about travel as a notion of more sort of the inner journey.
Yes.
Right? And to me, it appeared that the actual environment that I find myself in is sort of becoming my stimulus, and the matter of curated content probably is becoming really important. But I wonder, what role does the destination, the physical destination, actually play in the future?
Yeah.
Because when I see all these tents popping up and we just, basically we've sort of immersed people in great content, can that be anywhere in the future, or do we still want to travel far do we need that?
That's such a great question, because of course I didn't have examples of that in this presentation, but clearly one of the things we've seen is the growth of non-travel travel, which is the idea that I can just put on a pair of glasses and I can suddenly find myself in another part of the world, that maybe I don't even need to leave my room anymore. I don't need to leave my house, because I can actually see, the pyramids, or I can travel around the temples at Angkor Wat without actually having to damage the global footprint by traveling to Cambodia and actually being one of the millions of people that traipse around that very special, very sacred spot. So I think there's, one of the technological trends without a doubt we're going to see are people who will continue to immerse themselves in augmented reality and virtual reality environments and choose that as their form of getting away from it. Without a doubt, as mad as that sounds to some of us in this room right now, but trust me, as it becomes more and more real, as it becomes more and more visceral and more tangible, we will find people who will travel without leaving their chair. And so that sense of the conceptual elements of travel and the impact of that becomes more and more important. But I think your question taps into a more important thing, which is that, is it just about the content, or is it about some of the hardware as well? And I think for me, getting the hardware right remains the single biggest challenge that any hotel provider, any hotelier has, which is that actually when I'm there, I'm still surrounded by stuff that I want to touch. There are still walls that need pictures, and there are still floors and surfaces and tables that I sit at. And all of those things are equally important. And those high-touch details that are the hardware that create the hotel experience are still massively important. So as much as we talk about this idea of experience, you can never look at it purely in isolation, that somehow it's just this intangible conceptual thing. Which is why, for me, transformation as a word and the notion of the transformation economy is so relevant, because it talks to the goods, products, and services. It isn't just about this idea of experience. Because I think as a 21st century hotelier, if we want to get it right for the 21st century traveler, we have to understand what they want the moment they walk on property. And for some, as we've seen, that could mean that they want this stripped-back experience. The last thing they want is extraneous products littering the property. All they want is something really clean and all really, really pure. But then, as we see, you know, and one of the big trends, obviously, that we can see at the moment is actually the return of late 20th century nostalgia in many properties, where actually we see a kind of an excrescence, as it were, of 20th century design product. You know, you can't move for the alto stool and the chair and the this and the that. And actually, we're totally wanting all of the baggage and the product from another era. And part of that, I think, is a natural desire when we go on a hotel experience to have something that's very visceral and very, very tangible and tactile. So I think getting that hardware element is actually really, really critical as well.
We've probably got time for one very quick question and one very quick answer. So if anyone has another question. Well, I might ask you a very quick question.
Yes.
If I may indulge, which is, you know, you talk about the transformation economy and this transformation of travel. Is it the kind of thing that, say, in 20 years' time, we'll say, oh yeah, we transformed travel and it's done and let's go solve another problem? Or, you know, how much of this is sort of marketing and just, you know, you showed Singapore, you know, that amazing video. Singapore hasn't changed that much since that, you know, between their last video. But so how much of it is marketing and how much of it is real? What percentage?
That's a really good question, Ian. Look, I think a lot of it is always about communication, but the role of good communication is that it's touching a nerve, isn't it? Is that suddenly it's relevant. And it's relevant because our thinking is different. So that's very important to remember, that it's not just about somebody making a clever campaign. It's about the campaign is clever because it suddenly speaks to us. So it's relevant to our current mindset. And of course that will continue to change and evolve. And for me, the transformation economy, in its very nature, is going to be impermanent, because it's about a process of change, and hopefully we will continue to change and evolve.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Chris Sanderson of the Future Laboratory. Thanks again. Cheers.